My name is Jim Bowman, and I have a story. In my immediate family, I have my brother Graham, my mother Pat, and my deceased dad John. Growing up in my family, the roles were very nuclear. You know, mom was the mom. Dad was the breadwinner. Mom worked. She worked a lot of part-time when we first moved to Canada. My brother was the perfect older brother, and I was the misfit younger brother. So growing up with my brother was very different through the years. Like when we were younger, we grew up out in the country, so there was very little to do, and in the day and age of no electronics and no real neighbors, we did everything together. We rode bikes all the time and went strolling through the countryside, finding creeks to fish in and finding caterpillars and picking pussy willows and then as he got older, we grew apart. Even when we were when he was in high school, but he was always there to protect me and stand up for me. He was always my brother, even though we didn't get along. We fought a lot when we were young. Fought a ton. Mom cooked dinner. Mom, she generally took us to all our sporting events, picked us up from school, made our lunches. Coming from a European family, every Sunday night was dinner night. Like, every night we sat around the table to eat. Sunday was always a big roast beef or roast chicken, all the fixings, gravy, everything. Dad was the worker. He worked. He built the house, worked around the yard, got the firewood, all that kind of stuff. So just your general typical stereotypical gender roles that they played. We did get together. We did a lot of camping. Dad loved to fish. Worst fisherman you'd ever meet in your life, but he loved it. We had a little aluminum boat with a little 1.5 horsepower Johnson motor on it that would putter around in, and he'd be up. We'd go camping. He'd be up with the sun, out fishing every day, all day, and yeah, that's. Mom didn't like it. She wasn't a camper, but she did it for us. She knew it was good for the boys, and she did it for Dad. Started with like a wall tent, and then eventually would rent a cabin or a camper or something. Dad was very quiet and gruff. He was he drank a lot, which had its ups and downs. But he was very, he was a small man, but he was just your manly man. He did what dads did. He didn't talk a lot. There's no emotions. There's no feelings with Dad. Like he was the punishment giver, which is pretty normal probably in a lot of households of people my age. The whole just you wait till your dad gets home from Mom, right? So it was, but he was very giving as well. Like when he'd go out of town for work, he would always bring something back for us boys. Every time he came back, he'd get us some kind of toy or something, usually something that he really enjoyed as well playing with. So I always had Mom there to rely on and to be there for me. And like I said, Dad was always there for me as well, but it was, Dad didn't ask for help. So it brought me to that point as well, that it was really taught me to be independent and do things on my own. Dad's outlook on life was pretty hard to tell. Like he he just went through life. He enjoyed what he wanted to do. He worked. He worked to live. He didn't live to work. Like he loved going golfing. He loved his friends. He had some great friends that he got over the years at the golf club that he was a part of. And he was very, very solitary. He liked his alone time and just wanted to just make the best for himself and his family. He worked for NCR, which National Cash Register, which I think in his later years, I don't believe he enjoyed it all. I don't know exactly how old I was. Time's always a tough one for me. I was in my late 30s, mid 30s. Well, when I found out he had cancer, I was in my early to mid 30s when I found out. He would have been in his mid 60s when he found out that he had cancer. It was, it was tough, but it wasn't. You always had that hope that's like, okay, well, we can do something about it. So, and we weren't an incredibly emotional family. So Dad didn't display any emotion or worry over it. So it wasn't anything that I really spent a lot of time focusing on. So when we found out Dad had cancer, we actually fortunately had a fantastic family doctor at that time, who Dad got along with incredibly well, like everybody that he ends up meeting. There was a lot of tests done. I was actually really impressed with our medical system through it all. The feedback we got from them wasn't the greatest, but they took care of him very well. And he went in. He had surgery to remove part of his lung, and then that did well for a while, and then it came back. So he had to go back in to get the rest of his lung removed, and then that was hopefully the end of it. But it wasn't. It came back, obviously, and after he had his lung removed and had one lung left, they said he had the lung capacity of a normal man his age with two lungs. Like it didn't stop him from doing the things he really enjoyed. What really made it clear that the cancer was starting to set in was he was just getting tired all the time. Is what the first thing I noticed. He was whenever he was working outside with the saw or with the tractor, he'd spend more time resting, sitting on a stump, or he'd take more naps. He'd sleep longer. I was getting tired and just getting sore. Yeah, because Mom was very. She was very perceptive. She was very, she knew she had a good connection with Dad. My brother wasn't. My brother didn't live in Prince George at the time. He lived in Vancouver, so he knew, but he never really. He wasn't around for a lot of it. He'd come up for visits and everything whenever he could, but we kept him well apprised on everything that's going on, and he talked to Dad on the phone a lot. But yeah, there was a point near the end where Dad was just, he was pretty much bedridden, like almost 100% of the time. The last couple of months, 2-3 months, very, very difficult times for that. To see this strong man not being able to do anything, and it was terrible for him and really hard on him, because all he wanted to do was just be outside and playing golf or swimming in the ocean, or and just the painkillers started taking more. Mom started needing to be home to be a caregiver, giving him some pretty heavy painkillers as shots. And it went downhill fast when he went. It went really fast. The medicine didn't treat him well at all. He hit the point where he was, he was hallucinating, and like even little things like the curtains moving. He's like, think somebody's here, and and try to explain to him that there's not, and he just wouldn't. Your typical stubborn old man, he just wouldn't. He just wouldn't believe it because he knew somebody was here according to his eyes, and so it was really hard to deal with it because you'd get frustrated that you can't explain it to him, and he'd get frustrated and get mad and yell because nobody else is understanding what he's talking about, and you obviously don't want to get frustrated with a man that you've grown up with your whole life, that you've respected, and who's dying, and you have very little time left with him. So there was some really tough moments. My work was getting was really picking up. My career, I had at that time I had a really strong opportunity to further my career and kind of prove to myself that I was capable of doing more than what I was at the time. Of running a pretty large, pretty very difficult job. I went in and I said, Dad, I really want you to know. And he just interrupted me, says, don't say it. And I said, well, no, Dad, I want you to I need to tell you. He's like, don't say it. He says, I know, don't say it. And that was it. And I didn't say it. And to me, just him saying, don't say it, I know. It's like, he did know, and I knew as well. Like, so it didn't need to be said. I moved to stay back in the house with them for the last little bit to help Mom out because it was very draining on her. And Mom woke me up pretty early, 6:30ish probably, and said that Dad was struggling. So we had him upstairs at that point. I came upstairs and we sat beside him. Mom was holding his hand, and he was struggling to breathe. He was very labored. He took his last breath probably 10 times, and that was the hardest thing to watch, is that of just not knowing. He'd take a breath, and then there'd be 10 seconds, and then he'd just gasp in another breath, and every time after each breath you didn't know if he was dead or alive, or I'd like it to Schrodinger's cat. He exists in both states at the same time, and he just didn't know. And you're just sitting there waiting for that next breath, and at the same point hoping it doesn't come. And it was a very, very tough thing to watch. When Dad took his last breath, the very first thing I felt was relief. Just knowing he doesn't have to suffer anymore, and Mom doesn't have to suffer anymore, and we can go on with our lives without him now, and not have to put anything on hold. And it was just instant, and it was tough to come to grips with that, to realize, to think about, the very first thing I thought after my dad's passing was just relief that he was gone. And it took, a lot of soul searching and internalizing to really understand that feeling, and to come to grips that it wasn't wrong that I felt that way, and that I wasn't a terrible person because I felt that way, because I obviously wasn't glad my dad was dead. And so separating that emotion from the thought of what that emotion means was tough, because there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with feeling the way you feel. It was really tough to come to terms with that feeling, and about how it was the first thing that happened, and first thing that came into my mind, and it was it took a lot of soul searching to be able to separate that feeling from the thought of what that feeling means. It's an instinct. It's like just the way you feel it. It doesn't matter. It's not wrong. The feelings, it's raw. It's emotion. I mean, when Dad passed, part of it, and me going back to work, and I mean, he'd be the first person to claw himself out of wherever he went to kick my ass if I let his passing affect my life and my future. Yeah, after Dad passed, Mom moved down to Vancouver to be closer to her grandkids with my brother. She was obviously selling the house because it was also, I mean, it's in the country. There's no way Mom could handle it on her own. When the first people that were interested in the place came to look, Mom was on vacation, so I came out to get us tidy up and get the yard and the house kind of ready for people to see it. And then I left for the realtor to come in, and when I left, I started crying, and it was tough to think that it was going to somebody else, that the stupid little things like are going to change. Like there was a tree in front of the carport. There's like a 3-car carport, and I parked growing up when I was a teenager. I parked in the far left, and I had to go around this little stupid tree to get into my spot. I had to drive around it a little bit, and Dad loved that tree, and he never wanted that. Like he handpicked every single tree that's going to live and die, but I hit that tree with my car so many damn times. Leaving for school late and backing out and swing my front end into it and coming home. And even then, I wanted to own this house. I always wanted to own this place. It was, my home. And I always said the first fucking thing I do when I own this house is cut that tree down, because the tree it's just the worst tree in the world. And I left, and I thought somebody else is going to come in here, and they're going to cut that tree down. And they don't have the damn right to cut that tree down. So I couldn't do it. I couldn't let anybody else have the house. I called up the realtor, and I told him, forget it, I'm taking it. And dealt with my mom and my brother to work out a fair price for everybody, and bought the place. The main things that my dad really instilled in me, he said independence is a very big one for him. He'd do everything on his own. He'd figure it out. He built this house. He wired it. He plumbed it. He put the logs up. He built the roof. He did everything. He did the entire thing. And it sank with me as well. Like I do. The way I live my life, the way I do my job, the way I do everything is like I just do it by myself. I don't ask for help. I don't need help. Asking for help isn't necessarily a terrible thing to do, but it was just also it really allowed me to just take responsibility for what I do and who I am. And that 100% came from seeing him being the same way growing up. And so that's my story.